Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, Euronews' brand new talk show all about the European capital of Brussels, the city that many love to loathe. On Brussels, my love, we break down the big stories of the week, examine what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, for love or money, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's been at loggerheads with Brussels since coming into power in 2010, was in the spotlight again this week at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. MEPs say the European Commission should not release €7.5 billion in cohesion funds to Hungary due to democratic backsliding. The Commission agrees. With lots at stake for Hungary's economy, we psychoanalyse this awkward marriage between Brussels and Budapest. And the European Parliament turned 70 this week. Since it came about back in 1952, the Parliament has gotten bigger and bigger, opening its first hemicycle in Luxembourg in 1973, holding its first pan-European elections in 1979. But is the multi-party transnational parliament too big for its own good, too far removed from people? And should this anniversary be an occasion to celebrate or to reform? To talk about all this and more, I'm joined here in our studio by Daniel Landek from the Foundation for Civic Hungary. Good to see you. Camino Mortera from the Centre for European Reform, and Professor Alberto Alemano, a professor at EU Law at HEC Paris. Thank you so much for being with us here. Great to see you. Before hearing your views, let's just remind our viewers about this 1.5-year showdown between Brussels and Budapest over money.
€7.5 billion. The amount Hungary stands to lose from the EU's long-term budget if it fails to satisfy the European Commission's long-standing concerns over corruption and the judiciary. Four-time elected Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been in open confrontation with Brussels over these issues for some years now. The Hungarian government desperately needs the funds, though, as it seeks to shore up its economy and fight a deepening economic crisis. Talks have been ongoing for months between Brussels and Budapest on whether Orban's government has done enough to access the funds. But time is quickly running out for Hungary. If it doesn't meet the European Commission's requirements, Budapest faces losing the money and inflaming tensions further with Brussels.
And it looks like the European Commission will tell the Council to freeze that money. 65% of these so-called cohesion funds earmarked for Hungary from 2021 to 2027 in the EU budget, as Hungary has not met these so-called super milestones. We're expecting an announcement to be made next Wednesday. So, Daniel, I'd like to hear first your reaction to this massive news that was all over the media this week in Brussels.
Well, first of all, let me thank you that you invited me here for this show. I think it is also very important to hear Hungarians when you talk about Hungary, and that is something which I'm really happy to be able to do here. On the decision, I think we have to have more information. The Commission has come up with this decision very last minute, adding 10 additional points, and to be honest, I mean, nobody knows what these 10 points are about. We have to see what they really want, what their cause is, and then let's see what can be done.
These points in Commission jargon, they're called these super milestones. Professor Alemano, your reaction to the announcement that the Commission is set to make next Wednesday, and your take on these super milestones, what exactly are they?
Well, I think we need to take a step back to understand what's going on here. For years and years, we have a member of the European Union that has been departing from the rules of the game. The rules of the game are very clear. If you want to member and remain a member of the European Union, you need to have judicial independence, you need to guarantee that, you need to have media freedom, and you have to have mechanisms that ensure that European taxpayers' money is used in the right way in Hungary. None of these conditions are met today in Hungary. And it's not the European Union saying this, it's the Venice Commission, it's international observers, all possible democracy indexes shows that Hungary is no longer a democracy. How can we do that? How can we overcome this? Well, the only way is conditionality, making sure that future disbursements of European funds will be made conditional to the reform that are not really new, Daniel. This is something that has been going for many years. We know exactly what Hungary has to do, but there's
Let's
no
bring
really
in Camilo
compliance.
there and get your take to that announcement.
Thank you. I think you're talking about psychoanalyzing this drama, and I think that's a right way of looking at this, because we're looking at two different parties that had been at the loggerheads for many, many reasons. And this week's announcement from the European Commission sort of like builds into this psychodrama because it was not something that lots of people in the bubble were expecting to happen. We were expecting the Commission to sort of say, all right, Hungary, you've done your homework. You know, we're going to unblock this money for you, and we are going to tell EU governments to give you that cohesion money that you really need because your economic situation is really dire. And then we see the Commission sort of like turning in this decision and making something unexpected. And I think part of the reason for this is because of the current situation that we're in with Hungary, blocking every single decision that we have.
We'll come to that a bit later. But Daniel, as you said, you're delighted to be here with us to discuss this topic, and we're delighted to have you. It's very important to have the Hungarian perspective. We would have loved, of course, to have had a Hungarian MEP with us as well around the table. But this week, of course, all MEPs were in Strasbourg working very hard. And among those MEPs was our reporter from Hungary, Sándor Zsiros, and he caught up with one MEP who's from the Fidesz political party, the party of Viktor Orban. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about all these debates about Hungary and its funding.
We have long held the view that the attacks against Hungary have been primarily of an ideological nature. They talk about the rule of law, they talk about corruption and a number of other things, but in reality, the problem with Hungary is that it has a resolutely conservative Christian democratic government, and we're not afraid to enact measures according to our convictions and according to the support of the vast majority of Hungarians. Hungary has shown, goodwill and readiness to cooperate, readiness to compromise. Now it's time for Brussels to show that they are also ready for mutual trust and cooperation.
Time for Brussels to show it's ready for mutual trust and cooperation. I mean, is Hungary really compromising?
I don't think Hungary is ready to compromise. We just heard that the Christian democratic nature of this government would be a justification for all what they've been doing, which is basically reforms that have been undermining the democratic nature of the current government and the current state in Hungary. So what's next now? What we can expect, I think, is probably further political negotiations in which Hungary will make very difficult to reach agreement on OECD or on possible further sanctions on Russia, because that's what we've been witnessing over the last few months. So this is not the end of the story.
Not the end of the story. Well, Daniel, you are the Hungarian expert here around the table. Tell us about the reforms.
Well, first of all, I think we have to split up what we are talking about. As I hear today here, but I hear in Brussels very often, they mix up things. They talk about the rule of law and democracy and all these things in a general term. So do we talk about politics, or do we talk about ideologies, or do we talk about the legal framework? Do we talk about the details? When we come to the ideologies, I think we have a lot of things to talk about and see, and we will probably never agree. As my colleague from the parliament, Balázs Hidvégi, just said, I mean, we have a different understanding of what kind of life we would like to have, and the Hungarians want to live their life in their way. When it comes to the technical parts, when it comes to the legal parts, I think it is very clear that the Hungarian government is cooperating. There was an agreement between the Commission and the Hungarian government on 17 points. 17 points, what to change in the terms of the legal basis, in the questions of corruption authorities and so on. And Hungary has fulfilled all the 17 points which were demanded. And now, with a surprise, the Commission comes up with another 10 points. So why was the Commission not able to give their full line of points, what they wanted to change in advance? So I think Hungary has fulfilled all criteria.
But neither the Parliament nor the Commission agrees on the fact that Hungary has fulfilled those 17 points. What we just heard this week is that neither the Parliament nor the Commission are convinced. So there seems to be a disagreement on the statement you just made.
And in fact, the majority, Daniel, of European parliamentarians, so MEPs in Strasbourg, agreed that those funds should very much be frozen. We can take a listen now to a flavour of that debate that took place this week in Strasbourg.
A child can see that they have not remotely been met. So the conclusion can be fairly simple: no compliance, no money.
Only significant, tangible and lasting reform can enable the release of EU taxpayers' money. Nothing less will do.
Let's help the people, not the government. Direct EU funds to local governments, to civil society, to schools and hospitals, to those who need it the most.
Now finally, do what everybody agrees on. Don't give taxpayer money to autocrats. Thank you very much.
Camilla, reaction there to that?
Yeah, I like to agree with Daniel on something. I think that we are doing this completely wrong in Brussels as well. We are mixing a debate about values with a debate about the rules of the game. And I think we should separate both of those. On values, we disagree profoundly on many things. I think that we should strive to be a community of values in the way that the liberal democracies work. But this is my opinion, and this is the way that perhaps some European Union member states feel as well. On the rules of the game, I do agree with Alberto and with many of the MEPs there. And one crucial element of this is that the Commission did say that they were going to sort of monitor the functioning of the new integrity authority. So this is supposed to be an anti-corruption authority that the Hungarian government put in place by the 19th of November, when the authority had actually been working for a little bit, so that they could actually see what this authority was doing. And it seems to me that the Parliament was never going to be satisfied with what the Hungarians do, because the Parliament has been very activist on this particular dossier. But it seems to me that the Commission has been rather technical in assessing whether or not measures work, and we see with Poland as well. The Commission has been rather more positive with Poland, and if they have taken this assessment that we haven't been able to see yet, unfortunately.
Just on Poland there, Professor Alemano, is that double standards of the European Commission to be nicer to Poland because Poland has welcomed 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees and a bit tougher on Hungary?
Well, the Polish recovery plan was approved very recently, and there's no doubt that one of the reasons why that approval occurred is because Poland had to basically welcome millions of Ukrainian refugees. And that's certainly something that it occurred. But at the same time, we see pressure also mounting on the Polish government. It's not a done deal, right? Also, the conditionality regulation might be triggered there. There are a lot of open sites. But no doubt, the Commission turned a blind eye vis-a-vis the Polish government in a particular historical moment. That's something that we all witnessed over the last few weeks.
One thing that's clear, though, Hungary needs the money. Hungary needs that cash. That's a lot of money, and the Hungarian economy is not doing so well now. It's very linked to these cohesion funds. We can take, in fact, a look at a graph that shows between 2014 and 2020, Hungary received over 27 billion euros from the European Union. 3.3 billion of that money went to broadband, 3.1 went to unemployment and training programmes for workers, 2.8 billion went to SMEs, and 2.3 billion to environmental protection. So your country needs that money.
Not only Hungary needs the money. I mean, this money is needed by everyone. Tell me any economy in the European Union who's done well in the last weeks and months. And also, this money is not charity. This money was created to help the people, help the economies, help the countries to recover from the COVID crisis. That's part of that money. And the other part of the money is the general EU fund. I mean, these are not charity monies.
But is that money helping people in need? Is it helping people in need? We heard from Katalin Cseh,
until it's not paid,
that Hungarian
that's all,
MEP.
It is not going to help. I mean, just look at the recovery funds. 750 billions of euros were planned to help the European member states. Approximately 100 billion were paid. So again, the European Union is acting too slow, not efficient, and is not doing what they are supposed to do.
the European Union and some member states neither, because this is not an issue exclusive to Hungary. I was at a conference of mayors last week in Barcelona, and I spoke to many from Bulgaria who said a lot of people in need are not getting fundings because they're not getting past national governments. And we have a long list as well of examples of the misuse of EU funds in the last decade. Professor Alamano.
Well, the European Union is still an association of states, so the states represent and the nation state represent a bottleneck. That's where the money is going. We cannot circumvent the states and giving the money to the local authorities. There are people, we heard in the European Parliament, asking for such a reform, but constitutionally is not something very easy to be done without changing the treaties and seeing different kinds of actors beyond the nation states being able to make this happen.
Camino?
And at the same time, I do think that the Recovery Fund has solved some of the problems that we had with funds in the past. So it's basically linked to performance, which is something that many people have been calling for when it comes to EU funds, so that we don't lose track of where these funds go. There is a very strict enforcement procedure. There are milestones. You have to make sure that you are accounted for this money, that you're accountable, that you have a judiciary that works, that you have anti-corruption institutions. So I do think the Recovery Fund and the way it has been designed is going to solve some of these problems. But of course, for that, we need everybody working together. And unfortunately, as of now, we don't see some governments being
And one thing, as you all know, that's very important for European politics to work and compromises is mutual trust. Now, we do know these intense talks have been taking place for a long time between Brussels and Budapest, negotiators sitting down in front of each other, working hard. But is there trust?
Well, I think as long as the European Commission does what it was meant to be the guardian of the treaty and to be an administration which is not biased, which is not a political administration, which is not an ideological commission, I think there can be trust and there can be cooperation. I mean, the Hungarians are obviously ready for dialogue and cooperation, but we need to have it on a neutral way. So if the Commission would have, for example, analyzed the working of the Integrity Authority, I mean, how would they have done it? The authority was just established a week ago, or not even a week ago. I mean, how can you assess the working of this authority?
That's a key point, Daniel, if I may. It's not the adoption of a reform, it's the implementation. It's very easy for you. You control the parliament, your party you're related to is a party that has the full control of the parliament. You can adopt any kind of law to tick the boxes. But what is the implementation? And this is the key issue where there's a lot of ambiguity at the moment. It is enough to adopt those reforms, or you need to implement them and make sure that they actually work. This is the key point where there's a lot of mudding the waters at the moment.
I think you misunderstand how the Hungarian government and the Hungarian parliament works. It's not the government controlling the parliament. It's the parliament electing a government. That we have a majority in the parliament doesn't mean that the government is controlling the parliament.
I think
so
there is a parliament
with
a huge majority supporting Fidesz and basically a lack of opposition that allow your government to call the shots. Otherwise, you would not be able to reform the constitution so many times.
And just on another point, I think one thing that a lot of people in Brussels and across the continent do not understand is the billboards that the Hungarian government have been using taxpayers' money to put up across the country, slamming Brussels' sanctions vis-à-vis Russia trying to stop the war in Ukraine, blaming the sanctions for the problems. And how do you justify these? I mean, is that not a waste of taxpayers' money, these billboards?
Well, first of all, I don't know how the billboards come into picture here, but in general, I think it is normal and good of a government that they inform people on what's going on. These billboards are very simplified. I agree on that with you. But when it comes to the content of it, that the sanctions, and not the sanctions on everything, but the sanctions on energy, they are harming us Europeans, our European economies, much more than they hurt Russia. I think that is clear, and that needs to be communicated as well. Everything else is a lie.
But it just really highlights that awkward marriage, to what we mentioned earlier, Camino Montero, right, between Brussels and Budapest, ever since 2010, because before relations seemed to be perfectly fine between Brussels and Budapest.
Right, I think I'm just going to try to step away from the politics, right, and just look at the treaties. I know that this is very boring, but this is something that helps when we have to have this discussion. So you, Daniel, said the Commission was not doing its job because it was not supposed to add these 10 new points. I wonder whether you might think that Hungary, the Hungarian government, is adhering to something that we call here in Brussels the principle of sincere cooperation. And that implies that governments should work together and with the European institutions in a spirit of honesty. I'm not sure, for example, when it comes to the billboards and when it comes to all this rhetoric coming out from Budapest about Russian sanctions, I'm not sure who the audience for these kind of things are. I don't think it's Hungarian people. I actually think the audience is more like sitting perhaps in the Kremlin. And this is really worrying at a time of war.
Okay, Camino Monteiro, I'm going to have to stop you there because that is, I'm afraid, all we have time for on this topic, but don't go anywhere. After the break, we ask how the European Parliament should celebrate its 70th birthday by cracking out the champagne or reforming from within. See you soon on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we are picking apart some of the stories across Europe this week. Well, this week it was time to sing Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Nice bit of cheese there. Did you know who celebrated their birthday this week?
The European Parliament.
Absolutely. It turned 70 and it marked the occasion with a ceremony looking back at European history. Were you all celebrating?
No.
Well, one lady who was very much celebrating was Roberta Metsola. She's, of course, the president of the European Parliament who comes from Malta. But in her speech, she had a healthy dose of realism. Take a listen.
I am not here to say that we are perfect. We are not. Our peace and our processes sometimes frustrate. Progress is not always fast enough or deep enough or easy enough. We must keep reforming. We must keep pushing for positive change, day in and day out. But I am proud of our achievements, of Europe being a beacon of the defence of democracy.
Professor Alemanno, I'd like to start with you on this. Your reaction there. What reforms would you like to see done within
Well, let me be very blunt on this. The European Parliament is neither a parliament, it has no right to initiative, the only parliament in the world that has no initiative, and it's not European because its members are elected at the national level. So we need two major reforms. We need to Europeanize the electoral competition by allowing citizens to actually vote for candidates running all across the Europe. An Italian should be able to vote an Hungarian should be able to vote a Spaniard, representing European citizens and not local candidates running on national programs and just pushing for local issues.
Transnational lists, would you agree, Daniel?
Well, absolutely not, of course, but I understand this point of view and I respect it. But of course, we would like to have the parliament reformed in a totally different way. I think we would rather go back to the roots where the European Parliament came from and have a kind of national assembly on European level where the national parliaments have a stronger role and they could delegate members to the parliament. And also, would we like to see the national parliaments better involved in European decision-making? So if we can agree on something, that is that there is a need for reform, but I think we have a different approach because I represent, of course, the idea of a Europe of strong nations and strong member states, while others represent, of course, a pan-European idea or a centralized idea, which I respect, but I don't agree with.
Camino, your laundry list there for reforms?
Since I don't represent anything but myself, which is a good position to be in at the moment, I do have an issue with the Parliament claiming that it's the only democratically elected institution in the European Union, because we have to think of the Council as an association of governments who are very much elected in the member states. And I think if you're going to have a strong Parliament moving forwards, you do need the two things that Professor Alemanno said. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a Parliament in the first place.
The Strasbourg commute, it costs, what, 114 million per year, I believe. Should we put an end to that?
No doubt. Commute? There's a vast majority. Virtually all members of the European Parliament, they want to get the Strasbourg seat abolished. They want to stay in Brussels. Brussels is the de facto capital of Europe. That's where everything should happen. But of course, there are national interests. There are legacies. There is path dependency. We need to transition out of this bottleneck. And even the most pro-European camp, notably President Macron, is holding back. Think that Strasbourg deserves to become even more relevant and important. So you see, there's a bit of a tension there.
And Camino, of course, you mentioned earlier the treaties, how important they are, and it's written in the treaties, and that, of course, would have to be changed. Another thing you mentioned, Emmanuel Macron. Well, one of his projects, his perhaps vanity project, was the Conference on the Future of Europe, a one-year exercise which was sitting down and talking face-to-face with citizens from all across the European Union, try to bring the EU institutions closer to them. And the climax was back on the 9th of May, on Europe Day, in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. We saw the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen there, and also President Macron. I'd like to ask you all, was it worth the efforts and the money, that exercise?
The Conference of the Future of Europe. Well, the Hungarians have a strong feeling that there should be a debate on that. What kind of Europe do we want? Is the European Union actually going in the right direction? In Hungary, many people believe it is not going into the right direction. Therefore, there is a discussion which we support very strongly. And in Hungary, there have been hundreds of events on this subject. And a lot of NGOs, a lot of associations, a lot of civil organizations, a lot of people, of course also we as a party organization, did events on that. And we have come to many, many interesting results.
What the Hungarian people want. Not so much that you'd like to leave it and follow the Brits?
Not at all. Not at all. This is not a question. When you come to the question, if the Hungarians support Europe, feel European, if they support the membership in the European Union, you have numbers around 90% support. The question is not, do we like Europe or not? We like Europe. But do we like the European Union as it is organized at the moment? Well, then we have some question marks.
And what about you, Professor Alemano? You have to teach this subject to your students.
The Conference of the Future of Europe?
In general, and whether or not you think Europe is going in the right direction.
Well, nobody obliged Hungary to remain in the European Union, right? They can sort it out anyway. There are people arguing, colleagues of mine, constitutional professors, saying that their behavior, the behavior of the Hungarian government, already de facto represent a declaration of unilateral departure from the European Union, because de facto they are already out of the picture, right? So, you know, where are we going here? There might be a system, a situation in which the neighbors might say, hey, there's a neighbor misbehaving. We're going to push him out. It might happen. You know, it's not foreseen in the treaty, but you can read the treaty in a way in which Hungary could be pushed out. Why not?
You would like to say anything to that?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a very ideological approach, which only follows the ever closer union religion. Actually, it is quite a religion to many people here in Brussels. I think it is a fair and normal thing that in Europe, not everyone agrees on a centralized and unified European Union. And I think even left liberals should accept that, and even people who believe in the European Union as the only solution for everything should agree on that you can have different opinions on that.
Camino, very briefly from you.
I think...
Are you speechless?
Yeah, I'm speechless. You can have different opinions, that's for sure. The problem is when you start having these different opinions and blocking everything that is going on. I think that's what the problem is at the moment.
Well, I'm afraid that is all we have time for on that topic. The European Parliament, by the way, also came under a cyber attack by a pro-Russian group just a couple of hours after backing a resolution calling Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. You can read more about that story on Euronews. But for now, thank you so much for your insights and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon. Well, Christmas is coming and cities around Europe are getting excited. Take a look. As you can see there, the time has come once again to light up our cities and towns across the continent. But with an energy crisis ongoing, the big question this year, how to make sure the festive cheer consumes as little electricity as possible. Will you all be lighting up your homes this Christmas? Camino?
I won't be at my home since I'm going to be traveling to my family, so I will pass the bill to my family instead.
And they'll be lighting up?
I think so, yes.
And yourself?
Of course. I mean, Christmas is one of the most important festivities and events we have in the year. But privately we use candles.
privately used candles. Very romantic. What about yourself? Is LED lighting the way forward for this Christmas?
Some moderation, an opportunity to show the kids that we can live a different kind of lifestyle. It's possible to adjust. It's possible to be more sober and to be probably happier.
But is it possible to have a sustainable Christmas? An environmentally friendly Christmas?
I think Christmas and environmental friendliness is not definitely linked to each other. I mean, where do we start? Where do we end with that? We have a traditional Christmas tree at home with candles, and we have a normal traditional festivity food, Hungarian traditional food. So I think this is the question.
And what about you? I mean, it's tricky, right, for cities, because they want to cheer up people, get everyone into this festive cheer, but at the same time, people are like, we can't even afford to pay our energy bills.
I know, and we all need some cheering, right, after these 3 very tough years. For me, one thing that I'm going to try to do this year, because I have small children, is to be very conscious about the amount of things that we give them and the amount of stuff that we expose them to. So that's possibly one way to go as well, try to be sustainable in the way that we organize our Christmas presents.
And this week was also Black Friday. Did you buy anything?
I haven't even realized. There's a Black Friday. What is Black Friday? No, I think people, consumers realize that, yeah, we need some sobriety. We need to be less complacent. We need to realize that lifestyle has to change. We live in another world, and it's possible, again, to reconcile our well-being and wellness with a different kind of lifestyle. And it's not about, moderating or self-imposing on our... I mean, it's just happening. It's a signal we're getting from the outside, and it's very healthy that it's happening.
What's your take on that?
Well, I'm a conservative traditionalist, so I don't consume a lot in general. And if I consume, I try to have it on a long run and on a long term in general. So, no Black Friday for me.
No Black Friday for you. What about you?
I bought 2 lights for my bike.
Just for your bike?
Yes, so I think that counts as something good and positive.
And the fact that you're a biker, it means you're already thinking about the environment. Well, I mean, Christmas is a time which will be muchly celebrated across the continent. I know in Brussels they do want to provide the lights and they're trying to do it sustainably. But I mean, it's obviously very tricky. I saw in Portugal a lot of measures have been brought in this year in order to cut back on that illumination.
Well, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a city in Spain called Vigo, which main attraction is to illuminate the city, and they're busing buses full of retired people like my parents just to see these lights, and they are not cutting back this year. So you see, you have the 2 extremes, and none of them perhaps are the best way to go.
Not the best way to go. And Budapest, a beautifully illuminated city too.
That's right. Yeah, it is beautiful, especially at night when all the historic buildings are illuminated. I think it's worth a visit.
It's worth a visit, a city I've been to many times and I will return to. Thank you so much, Daniel. That is, I'm afraid, all we have time for. Professor Alemano, thanks for coming from Paris to be with us here in the studio at Euronews.
Thank you.
And Camino Montero, the head of Brussels office at the Centre of European Reform. It was great to have your insights too. That is all we have time for, but stay with us here on Euronews and Euronews.com.